Hi guys, it's Tom from farfaraway.org. I've been watching a few battle reports for Kill Team, and I've noticed that people are having difficulty understanding how the injury rolls work. I can understand why. I mean, in the rule book, they're not written as clearly as they could be. The information in there is accurate, but depending on how you read it, you could make some mistakes. Um, so what I'll do is I'll run through an example here, but I'll start by actually reading a couple of sections from the rule book. So on page 31, towards the bottom of the page, for inflict damage, the damage inflicted is equal to the damage characteristic of the weapon used in the attack. A model loses 1 wound for each point of damage it suffers. If a model's wounds are reduced to 0, any further attacks directed against this model by the attacking weapon are not resolved, and then the player controlling the attacking model makes an injury roll for the target model. Okay, so it's worth kind of teasing out a couple of things there. So when the wounds are reduced to 0, any further attacks directed against the model by the attacking weapon, they're not resolved. Okay, so in that situation, you don't end up with this point where you've got multiple injury rolls because the weapon made multiple attacks. You can, however, end up with multiple injury rolls based on how much damage the weapon does. And that's where it's worth looking at a section on the following page. And it's page 32, it's entitled Damage Characteristic. If a model loses its last wound to an attack that has a damage characteristic of more than 1, the player whose model made the attack rolls a number of dice equal to that characteristic when making the injury roll, rather than just 1, and applies the highest result. Okay, so that's how you end up rolling multiple injury dice, and it's the only way to do it. There's one other section that's worth just reading slightly here, because I think this is what's causing confusion for some people. And it's entitled Injury Roll. It's also on page 32. And what it says is when a model's wounds are reduced to 0, the controlling player, unless otherwise stated, for example, inflict damage on page 31, makes an injury roll for that model. So this piece of rule text, I believe, is written for 1 or 2 very specific situations. I mean, it uses the phrase controlling player. And earlier in the rulebook, controlling player is defined as the person who owns and controls a particular model. And that seems to be a little bit of conflict with what we've just read. But it's not when you read the detail. First off, it talks about that there are exceptions. The only time I think you end up rolling an injury roll for one of your own models is if, for example, that model falls. If they're jumping from point to point, they fall, and that fall results in them being wounded to 0 wounds, and then they end up doing an injury roll. It may be the situation that it happens if, for example, something explodes, maybe a trap. But again, that would need to be have some very close reading as to who makes that roll. So if an attack is made against a model, combat or shooting, it is the attacking player who makes the injury roll. Why is all this important? Who rolls what dice? Well, if you roll a dice, you have an opportunity with a tactical reroll by spending a command point to re-roll that dice. So for example, if you're attacking somebody, you roll an injury roll against them ultimately, you don't like the result, you have a choice there. And that's obviously important. So let's look at this scenario that I've laid out here. Movement phase has happened, there's no psychic phase, and as you can see, the players have the tokens to indicate what they did. Initiative is with the cultists, so their first readied model is going to shoot, and that's the seismic cannon armed neophyte who's in behind the red crate there. And he's going to target the incoming Dark Angel in the open. The seismic cannon has 2 weapon profiles, and he's going to use the shortwave profile, which has a maximum range of 12 inches. Now, when you look at that range, we have to check see if the Dark Angel is within half range of this. So there's a 6-inch bubble, so yes, he's within half of the 12-inch range, so there'd be no negative modifier. So that model's completely in the open. Cultists aren't the best shots in the world, so they have a ballistic skill of 4 up. And this guy's shooting a heavy 2 profile, so the seismic cannon and shortwave is heavy 2, strength 6, -1 AP, and it does 2 damage. So let's see what happens. Let's bring some dice out and see what occurs here. So let's roll these. Okay, I rolled 2 6s. That's pretty good. So they're 2 hits. It's strength 6 against toughness 4, so that means it'll be wounding on 3. So let's roll that again. So that's 1 goes through. Does the Dark Angel player then make a save? So that would be on him to make that, him or her to make that save. So rolling dice, they normally have a 3-up save. It's -1, so they'll have a 4-up save. I'm hoping he doesn't save it. See what I roll here. Okay, he does actually fail it. Okay, so reading through the rule there, an attack has reduced this model who only has 1 wound to 0. That attack did 2 damage. So in this instance, the attacking player, who's the Genestealer Cultist player, will now roll 2 dice, and that will determine the result, the injury roll. In the open, so basically a 4-up will put this model out of action. Both of those are only flesh wound results. You choose the highest. So we're choosing the 2 here as the flesh wound result. Now the Cultist player has a choice. He could spend a CP to re-roll that, and let's just say they're going to do that, so I'm going to re-roll that 2. Still a poor result, so that Space Marine will note that he is flesh wounded. Okay, so if play was to continue, we'd now move to the Death Watch readied models, and let's say the Space Wolf is going to take a shot here. He's within 12 inches of the Cultist on the top. The Space Wolf is armed with a bolter, so he's within half range, so the Space Wolf will be hitting on 3s and it'll be rapid firing. So let's grab a couple of dice for him. So let's see if these can roll any better than they just did in the injury rolls. They seem to have rolled 1s again. Let's roll again. Okay, so fudging things a little bit, he's managed to get 1 hit. It's a strength 4 against a toughness 3 model, so he'll wound on 3s, which he does. The Cultist has a 5-up save. Let's see if he makes that. So it's upside the Cultist. This is beyond the Cultist player to make this roll. He does not. So that has reduced the Cultist player to 0 wounds, or the Cultist model. So now it's on the Deathwatch player who caused that to make the injury roll. So re-rolling the dice just beside the Space Wolf there. And he rolls a 3. And again, it will be on the Deathwatch player to determine if he wants to use one of his CPs. And let's just say he's going to get greedy and try and take that model out, because a 1 to 3 is just a flesh wound. So let's re-roll that. Oh, 3. Okay, so it will be a flesh wound on the Cultist up on top of the roof. So again, we just note that. And then play would continue with the moving players as the players who are now going to take shots with their weapons. Obviously paying attention to the flesh wounds that are on those models, because that will impact their ability to hit. So the only time you roll multiple dice when you're making an injury roll is when the damage characteristic of the weapon that caused the damage is greater than 1. And they're quite clear in the rules, if it's a random number that you're rolling, D3 or D6 damage, if that indicates a number greater than 1, that's the number of dice you're going to roll on that injury roll, but you choose the highest. It doesn't cause multiple flesh wounds, for example. So if you've got 2 or 3 flesh wounds rolled from a number of dice, only the top result applies, so it just applies 1 flesh wound. And that's basics of injury rolls. Again, as rules is written, I can understand how people could make mistakes here. But hopefully this little example will help clarify things for people. Thanks for watching.